Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about electoral reforms. Of course, we've recently seen the government has instituted electoral reform in certain key areas. We'll be talking about the ramifications, of course, while the bill is now going to go for presidential consent and then it will be made law. For all intents and purposes, of course, the government has legislated on crucial issues as far as election are concerned. We'll also be talking about the overall delimitation census, which of course the Election Commission has been focused on for some time. We've seen the reaction come from PTI as far as these electoral reforms are concerned. Overall, as far as the other parties are concerned, the PDM is concerned, there seems to be by and large agreement on the electoral reforms, and as far as the next elections are concerned, what kind of effects these will have. We'll be talking about all of that today on Perspective. I have with me Hafiz Ehsan Khokar, who's a member Supreme Court Bar Association. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Rana Ihsan Afzal Khan from the PMLN. Thank you for joining us today. And Niaz Murtaza, who is a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Hafiz Sahab, how do you look at the electoral reforms overall? Because there's a lot of hue and cry, of course, coming from the PTI against it. And of course, the way that they were instituted firstly by the last government, there was criticism then that they were bulldozed in a manner. How do you look at it overall?
Thank you very much. This is a very important subject relating to the future of Pakistan. That for every democratic country like Pakistan, we must have a free, fair and transparent election, and which should all be free from all malpractices. Election Commission of Pakistan is a constitutional institution established under the Constitution. It has certain mandates relating to the holding of elections in the country, as well for the provincial governments and for the local government as well. The responsibilities has also been prescribed in Article 219 of the Constitution, and further 2017 an electoral reforms and the Election Act 2017 was promulgated by the Parliament and replaced the earlier ROPA Act 1976. Now we are in, and thereafter there were certain amendments made by even the previous government and the last government, and now the government has proposed certain amendments in the electoral laws of the Pakistan. If we talk about this could not be said electoral reforms. The electoral reform was taken place in Election 2017 Act, and then certain amendments was made. Now two amendments only have been introduced in the Parliament, and both the houses have passed these amendments. One relating to the rights to facilitate the votes of overseas Pakistanis, and the second is the using of the EVM machines. There has been some controversy between the previous government and the Election Commission of Pakistan regarding the usage of the EVM machines, because they thought about at that time that there should be some pilot projects. It would not be applicable for a whole of the country, and even they talked about to facilitate for the overseas Pakistanis in a massive scale outside the Pakistan there would be a problem there. Instead, to address the issues on both these sides administratively, because there is no issue at the moment with the right of vote to the overseas Pakistanis. There is a misconception that the right of vote of the overseas Pakistanis somewhere has been lost. The right of vote is there. The only amendment which was earlier even made by in election 2017 to facilitate, and the last government has further facilitated, and they have drafted a system, and earlier this was initiated by the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and later on it was included in the election.
But isn't it true that it's now dependent upon them coming and voting rather than being able to do a postal ballot or being able to vote from overseas?
If we think on it that overseas Pakistanis is a big assets of Pakistan, there is no deny on it. Overseas Pakistanis has a strong affiliation affiliation with Pakistan, it is undeniable. Overseas Pakistanis are contributing our economy by sending us remittances, which they have crossed in around 31 billion US dollars. So in that moment, the Election Commission of Pakistan and the government of Pakistan should not brush aside the demands of the overseas Pakistanis to facilitate. I have given suggestions on it that if it is not feasible, that all the overseas Pakistanis, they should be accommodated at that time, and there is certain reservations about the usage and secrecy of the ballots. So one thing can be said that we can divide on that area. If we have an issue, the voting in issue in the Middle East countries, we can start in USA, we can start in the Europe, but we should start on that area. We should use the technology. We should facilitate overseas Pakistanis, and all the political parties who are in parliament and who been in the parliament, they have overseas chapters, the political chapters, they are there. Right. So we should ask the Election Commission of Pakistan. Now in this particular amendment, we have given them the option that you go for it and then you submit a report to the parliament, and then we'll move on both on sides, on the EVM sides and on the voting of the overseas Pakistanis. I must say that...
Let me come back to you, Hafiz Sahab, I'll come back to you. I'm going to go to Rana Ehsan Sahab. Ji, Rana Sahab, overall, as far as the PTI is concerned, there has been a lot of criticism coming from, as far as these amendments are concerned. And there is a lot being said in terms of depriving overseas Pakistanis of rights, and also the fact that this really is a ploy, according to them, by the government of targeting their voter base, which they say is overseas Pakistanis. How do you respond to that?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Firstly, we did not exclude them from these recent amendments for the electoral process. It is they themselves who are not a part of parliament. We welcome them. They should be part of the parliament and they should participate. If they have any concerns, they should raise them in the relevant committees in the parliament or the house, and we would welcome that. So it is by their own choice that they are not participating. Secondly, I believe that the amendments they made were one way. They did not include the input of the opposition at that time, and they bulldozed the EVMs, knowingly that it is highly impossible to have elections via EVMs all across Pakistan. It is unprecedented. The past...
Rana Sahab, you're saying that this is an overall failure of, incapacity. We don't have the kind of capacity needed at this time to ensure that overseas Pakistanis can participate in a postal ballot, so to speak, which is at this time in practice in other parts of the world, right?
So regarding the overseas Pakistanis, we believe they have the right to vote and they should participate in the electoral process. The confusion or the process which has not been formalized is to come up with a mechanism which is transparent enough for all the stakeholders to accept and allow them to vote. So, that is the only hurdle, and in these amendments, we have allowed the Election Commission of Pakistan to work on it and to give us recommendations on what process they feel is going to be rigging proof, which they feel is going to be acceptable by all stakeholders to be, transparent enough, and, we welcome that. And that is the way forward. Instead, we pick and choose one process that we feel is right, we being a single party, and then, bulldozing it on all the stakeholders involved in the election process. For me, you see, the electoral reforms, the spirit of the electoral reforms requires that all the stakeholders who are going to be affected by it should be involved in one way or another, and their input should be included, and it should be a unanimous decision on any process that we approve, or if there is a new law or an amendment in the assembly, it should be all inclusive and unanimous. So because if even one player feels that the rules of the game are rigged or are going to be give them a disadvantage, then the process is challenged. So I feel that even now PTI being missing out of this process is a negative. And we welcome them in the parliament. They should be there, they should be participating, and they should be giving their inputs in the relevant forums.
Right, let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Niasab. Niasab, there's, of course, we have been saying for a while, we've been talking about this for a while now, in terms of the resignations of the PTI MNAs in the National Assembly also. We know that, there has been, the government has said again and again that they should come back and they should try and participate, which is what Rana Saab is saying also. In the whole amendment process, in the parliamentary functions at this time, in whatever legislation is happening in Parliament at this time. But there doesn't seem to be any move towards that. There also has been a categorical no from Imran Khan Saab as far as that kind of involvement is concerned. How do you overall look at this? Because, criticizing from the outside, we've seen the call for protests also, the long march also. Even today, there has been a call of protests nationwide. Do you think those are effective strategies at all for a political party like the PTI and choosing to sit outside like they are?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think they are. The PTI is claiming that there was a conspiracy and it was removed through a conspiracy. But frankly, it hasn't, been able to put up even an iota of evidence that there was any kind of conspiracy. As far as I can see, as a neutral observer, there was a fair vote of no confidence, and the PTI tried to, end that process through a very unconstitutional move, which the deputy speaker did. And then, even the Supreme Court struck that down and said that, that was a wrong move, and the assemblies were brought back to life. So I think it's time for PTI to realize that, it doesn't have sufficient evidence to claim any kind of foul play, and it should come back to the assemblies and play its role. Now, the thing is that, it's sent out these resignations, which from what I hear are all typed out and, with the exact same language and just the different signatures. So I'm not sure whether they meet the requirements that are given in the Constitution about, I believe there's a requirement for a handwritten resignation, and then it should be verified by the Speaker. And the Speaker has, started a process starting from 6th June, but the PTI doesn't even want to, become part of it. So you'll be left in a limbo where the Speaker is unable to, verify the signatures, but at the same time, the PTI is not willing to come back to the Assembly. So I don't know how long this is going to drag forward. The same thing had happened last time after 2014 when it resigned. It was just a sort of a political patch-up that led to them coming back. So I don't know how it's going to work out now, but there are so many critical...
Let me come back to you, Niasab. I'm going to go to Hafizab. How, constitutionally speaking, legally speaking, what are, what is the position at this time as far as these resignations are concerned? Do they have to, I understand there was also a call for them to appear in person, which Imran Khan Saab said categorically that his members will not go. So what is the process? Is there a time lapse, by which if they don't go, they will automatically take effect, or how is it going to work now?
The actual, the rule of business or the Constitution says that the resignation has to be signed by a person and should be his hand addressed to. So this is the first requirement, and the second requirement would be that it should be submitted to the office of the Speaker, and then after the acceptance, if Speaker accepts, that it goes to the Election Commission of Pakistan, and Election Commission of Pakistan would announce, and if it is on the reference site, then he should denotify, or otherwise if the resignation is accepted by the Speaker, then there would be a new election, the by-election in that constituency.
But
now in this particular case, the members of the PTI, they have resigned in a big numbers.
Right.
And they are more than 133 in the National Assembly. So at the first stage, at that time when there was a deputy speaker, the deputy speaker accepted these resignations, and even they have asked his secretariat to send these information to the Election Commission of Pakistan. But in the meanwhile, the new government came into power, and the new Speaker, he took the oath and he made a ruling in the Assembly's proceedings that we have resignations in our offices, but we will verify it. See, now there is a confusion between only this is a political game. That on one side they are saying our resignations have already been submitted and it is accepted by at that time the deputy speaker. The present speaker, he is saying that though we have received the office the resignation in our office, but still we need some verifications. So
but it's not part of procedure generally to have that kind of verification, right?
It should be, it should be, but it should be, but
it's
in that it should be, it might be in individual cases, but in that particular case when the head of party, he is saying that we all have resigned, and all the
on TV,
on
and
the
it's not
TV
something that,
and in the newspapers, all are saying, even the members of the parliament, they are saying we have resigned on it.
Right.
So there is no issue at all, just
There's no
because
question of there's not
just because the reference has not been submitted to the Election Commission of Pakistan, and Election Commission of Pakistan have not denotified, you can say, or they have not called for a new election. So just it is a time between that,
and
the procedure.
Let me go to Rana
Yeah.
Sawal. Rana sir, is it because, why isn't there a move to accept the resignations? I mean, of course, you've seen, like, Hafiz Saab is saying, there is a categorical, a no by the chairman of the party. He's saying, my members have resigned, we have resigned, we will not go. We will even not take part in the verification.
And no one has denied, Ji.
And no one has denied.
And no one
yes.
has denied.
So why are we, why are we waiting for there to be? Is it because the Election Commission is not in a position to call by-elections on such a large number of seats? What is the actual issue behind acceptance of these resignations and moving forward?
This is the mandate of the Speaker of the National Assembly. It's not a party policy of PMLN or People's Party. The Speaker is supposed to be an independent official, and it is his prerogative. Now, that being said, we have had mixed signals coming from PTI. When Shiri Mazari was arrested, it was stated that she's still an MNA and she should not have been arrested without the prior notification to the Speaker of the Assembly and his permission. That meant that, and we were hearing that they're still drawing salaries from the National Assembly. So that there is confusion about that, and the fact that the resignations are are typed and not handwritten. But even this being said, I feel that the Speaker should be calling these members, and he should be verifying whether
they're saying that they're not going to. I mean, they're saying that they're not going to take part in this verification process. Another interesting thing. Let me come back to you, Ji.
Well, that makes it even, more confusion, because they're saying that their resignations were accepted by the previous speaker, which we feel cannot happen because, he had to face a no confidence motion. So, him accepting the resignations was not possible. So maybe it is this confusion which is delaying this acceptance of resignations.
Okay. Let me come back to you. Nyasa, we've also had, Imran Khan Saab say that they will be taking part in the other by-elections. So while they're saying that they are not part of this process, they're saying that they are resigning from the National Assemblies, they will be taking part in other by-elections. Isn't there general confusion? Do you think that, they want to either also keep a leg in? Is it a political strategy? How do you look at it? Or is it a move now that has to come from, the Speaker of the National Assembly or the PDM having a joint strategy on these resignations? How do you look at this?
No, I think there's a fairly well thought out strategy there. What the PTI wants to do is to, resign from the National Assemblies and force a national election for the National Assembly while keeping its assembly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And obviously they also have a hope, because the numbers are so evenly divided, that they might be able to wrest back the government in Punjab. And if they're able to do that, and if they're able to force elections for the National Assembly, then they will be in a very comfortable position where they'll have provincial governments in Punjab and KP, and elections will be held while those provincial governments are in place. So I think that is what is the strategy of PTI. Now, obviously, I don't think it will work out that way, and that's why what it's trying to do is to retain its position in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and force the government's hand in the National Assembly. Now, as far as the rules are concerned, and the gentleman, the lawyer also explained it. They give a lot of discretion to the speaker in terms of how they go through it, what is the time frame. They can drag it on for months. There's no fixed time frame for it, and not even a very clear procedure. And then the other thing is any decision that the speaker takes on a matter like this, and if the PTI is not happy with it, I'm not sure whether they would have a legal option there because of that infamous Article 69, which says that courts can't look into any procedures of the national of the assemblies and the speaker. That is the basis that PTI had used to dismiss the vote of no confidence. Now, obviously, in that case, it didn't work out because it wasn't a procedural irregularity. It was a huge constitutional violation, and the court struck it out. But I don't know how the courts will, look at this matter. They might say that something as small as this might be considered a procedural irregularity, and therefore the speaker has discretion in it. So obviously now it depends on the strategy of the PDM government. Of course, you can say that it's the speaker's discretion, but the speaker is going to decide based on what the PDM alliance decide, which is if they want to accept the resignations or not. If they want to continue for 18 months, then it might make sense for them to accept at least say 30-40, where they can hope to win, and then hold by-elections and increase their strength in the National Assembly so that they can pass on, some constitutional amendments. So both
do you
sides
think they can, let me go to Hafizab. Hafizab, do you think they can accept piecemeal resignations and not accept the others?
No, he can't.
He can't.
He can't, because the interesting thing is now at the moment is that all those members who did not resign from the PTI, they are sitting in assembly, and they are almost 19 or 20 members. So meaning thereby who had not resigned, they are still the members, and who had given the resignations to the speakers, they are not going to the court. Now what they are taking the advantage from that area, sometimes there is some observation from the Islamabad High Court that you can't arrest a parliamentarian until you get the consent or the assent from the speaker or the Senate. It is merely a technical things that until someone is not denotified or someone is not coming on his seat through the election process, the stalemate situation would continue. But more important thing would be, now we are in a condition in our country, there is a lack of communication dialogue between the major political parties of the country, and we are now demanding and heading towards the next election. If we are going on the same situation for the next election, there will be again chaos in the country.
Okay.
And the chaos in the country, the political chaos in the country would be converted into economic chaos, and then there is a governance chaos, and there are so many reasons. So the most important would be the government, they should take a lead on it. They should call a dialogue on all the political parties in the country, a formal dialogue on that, talk about the election, talk about the election reforms, talk about the economy. And I must say now we need 3 charters. The Prime Minister is saying we need a charter of economy. But now we need in Pakistan the charter of economy, the charter of election reforms, the charter of governance, and the charter of justice. And that should be carried for minimum 15 to 20 years, that even so, even the PTI or the PMLN or any political party like the People's Party, they would come into power, but this would be our foreign policy, this would be our national security policy, this would be our economy policy, this would be our justice policy, and we should work on it. That on the other side, if you talk about that now the prices are hiking up because of inflation in the country, because there is a dollar parity issue, this is because of the political instability, this is a major cause of that. Then there is a governance collapse. No one is happy from the style of the government, from the government officials. No one is happy from the justice system. It takes years and years on that side. No one is happy.
Let me ask Rana Sahab about this. Rana Sahab, do you think, as far as these charters are concerned, whether we talk about charter of economy, we talk about charter of justice, which is what Hafiz Sahab is saying, all of these things, reforms. We saw the PTI when it came into parliament. Certainly, of course, all major political parties contesting the next elections will hope for a larger mandate. But in terms of what happened in the last government, we saw that there was a coalition government, there were also allied parties. And it became, according to the PTI, it became difficult for them to institute any kind of major reform, which was the main agenda on which they had come into power. Do you think that there is a chance, because certainly as far as economy is concerned, things are not great? And you've acknowledged this, your government has acknowledged it, the Prime Minister has time and again acknowledged it and said that he's walked into the situation and he is committed to changing it, as is the PMLN, as is the government overall at this time. Do you think that there can be a move towards that kind of charter which can continue for 15-20 years? As far as the government or across the board political parties are concerned, so that these major issues on which all political parties agree can move forward regardless of who is in power and who wins the election and what kind of numbers they come up with.
Well, I believe that there has to be a working relationship between the opposition and the government, which did not exist in the last 4 years of PTI. It was by the choice of the Prime Minister Imran Khan, then Prime Minister Imran Khan. I believe that the solution and where we are right now economically, the ranking of the judiciary, and overall how the governance is being done, your tax situation, your collection. I believe if there is no political stability, if there is not a working relationship between the opposition and the government, if there is infighting between the institutes, this country is going to head towards a collapse. There is no doubt in my mind that it will happen. So I think this is the requirement. What you've just said, it has to happen. And I would urge, when we say the agriculture department or the establishment, they should play a role of enablers. They should, rather than intervening in the matters of politicians, the role of the judiciary or these other powerful stakeholders should be enablers. We have to sit together. There is no other way. If this keeps on happening, the country is not going to come out of this economic mess. We have to have judicial reforms. We have to have reforms in police. We have to have a minimalistic understanding on how the economy is going to work, and this has to be done by the government and the opposition. The parliament system, the assembly has to work. They have to work.
Let me come back. I'm going to go to Nyasab. I'll come back to you, Rana Sab. Nyasab, what Rana Sab is saying is a very rational way of looking at the overall scenario. Hafiz Sab is also, saying exactly the same thing. But in terms of political parties, it is like one of those things that, as far as increases in fuel prices are concerned, if all political parties sit together, I don't think there would be any disagreement on the fact that these were decisions that had to be made, and Pakistan cannot choose not to make them.
We can't afford now.
We cannot afford not to make them at this time. The government has to make these tough decisions. Any government would have had to. I think if PTI had been in power at this time, they would eventually have had to let go of the subsidies and make these tough decisions. But of course, because of the politics of it, there will not be agreement on that. Because of the politics of it, they will try to blame it on the current government, all of those things. Do you think the kind of maturity that is needed, that perhaps we see in other parts of the world, when elections are concerned, when politics is concerned, when, national interest is concerned, is ever going to surface here, or is it all going to be about blaming each other to gain politically for a certain time for our political parties?
Well, I think it did surface here in Pakistan between 2008 and 2018. We did see a lot of, collaboration between parties. The PPP had a very thin majority from the 2008 elections, but it was still able to pass such a huge constitutional amendment, the 18th Amendment, the most far-reaching law since the 1973 Constitution itself. And, it did have 2/3 majority in both houses, but it worked together with, all the other parties and pass that law. Similarly, we saw the same thing under PMLN. They did not have 2/3 majority in the Senate, but they were still able to pass consensus, significant game-changing bills. Like there was this fairly large constitutional, not a constitutional amendment, but an electoral reform bill, which was passed with the assistance of all the parties, including even PTI, and then there was a constitutional amendment for FATA merger. So we did see, some degree of, this kind of collaboration. There was a Charter of Democracy, and there was the first time in Pakistan's history that you had the 2013 elections where power went very smoothly from one fairly elected government party to another fairly elected party. But obviously after 2018, all that spirit is gone, and we see again this, very, very partisan kind of politics that unfortunately PTI has reintroduced. It's back to the 1990s, the way PMLN and PPP used to behave in the 1990s. Now PTI is behaving in the same manner. It's, our way or the highway. So I don't know how it's going to come back to that. Maybe Imran Khan.
How do you see, what do you see in terms of, in the next couple of months? Because we are going to be seeing, if I'm not wrong, and Rana Saab can correct me, but we are going to be seeing the government take the tough decisions that they have to in the next couple of months. Is that going to be? Is there going to be more protesting? Is there going to be more hyperbole coming from PTI? A lot of politicking, so to speak. Which is really not going to make way for any kind of reform. It's not going to make way for any kind of charter that we are talking about, right?
Well, I think from what I can see, the government has fairly made up its mind that it wants to complete its term until August next year. And I think the PTI is not in a very strong position right now to, make the government change its mind. But then, this is Pakistani politics. Anything can happen, a security situation, something external. If the economic situation deteriorates, if the government makes any mistakes, if the coalition starts fighting, then, the situation can change pretty quickly. So I wouldn't, venture to say how long this government is going to last. But for the next 2 or 3 months at least, I think it's safe. And then it will depend on its, competence, its outcomes that it is going to achieve, and the unity that it's able to maintain in its ranks.
Right. Let me go to Hafiz Saab. Hafiz Saab, as far as delimitation census is concerned, we've seen that happen also. We've seen the Election Commission involved in that for a while now. Do you think that that will change things significantly as far as the next election?
No, it should not be. That because of two major reasons, they are going to exercise the limitation or the delimitation area. One is the merger of the FATA, and 6-7 seats have been reduced from the National Assembly. So now there is now a reallocation of the areas, and almost 7 lakh something 60,000 area of population is the basic area of the constituency of the National Assembly of Pakistan. Then before every election, because of certain reasons like the merger in FATA or the strength of the National Assembly has been decreased, or due to the announcement of the census in Pakistan, they are going to exercise it, and all the political parties or even the voters, they have a right to submit their objections to the Election Commission of Pakistan, and if it is not being heard, then they have the power to go to the High Court and then to the Supreme Court. It's not a big issue that minor sometime this area converts into another constituency goes in a smaller way, and then it converts to another area. So this is not a big issue. The big issue is now is that before going to the election, even if we go after 3 months, 6 months, or the tenure which is the constitutional tenure of the present National Assembly, that we should all sit together, the Election Commission of Pakistan, the political parties, the administrative structure of that, we should be prepared and ready for the future election of Pakistan. If we are not going on that area, I'm again saying that there will be a political chaos, there will not be accepted. Might be if the PTI will win, the other parties who are in the government, they will say there will be a rigged election, and if they will lose the election.
But doesn't that always happen as far as unfortunately our history of politics is concerned? apart from 2013, which is what
it's happening since 1985,
right?
1988, 1990, 93, 97, then 2007, and then 2013 and 14. Every time this is happening because we have the weak institutions,
right,
and we don't have the trust. And interesting to say, the history is not, the political history is not for the past. The political history for Pakistan is the future.
right,
That every event would made, it is the history. You can't say this has happened in the past and we should learn about some experience of that, or we should learn from these areas. Ultimately, the people of Pakistan, they are suffering. Ultimately, the state institutions, they are suffering. Ultimately, our economy is suffering. Ultimately, our governance is suffering, justice is suffering. So these are the weak areas, and this is the constitutional responsibility of any government to work for the well-being and to work for the facilitation of the citizens of Pakistan. If they are not working and they are living in a system that where they are talking about to save their own and make the allegation, this is not in the interest of the country and for the citizens of Pakistan.
Right, let me go to, I want to take Rana Saab's comment on this. Rana Saab, are you going to, have you invited the PTI? We've seen the Prime Minister say, certainly, that he's willing for them to sit down and talk about issues. As far as, at this time, it seems like, the loss is theirs, certainly. It seems to have given a carte blanche as far as, your party is concerned, as far as the PDM is concerned, as far as the situation in the National Assembly is concerned. As far as the numbers are, of course, you can legislate on anything you choose at this time.
But there is the issue of the credibility and trust.
That is something that,
that is the essence of a parliament. That
right.
is the essence of a parliament.
Do you think that because of that might prove to be an issue later on? That's what I wanted to come to. Because, at this time, of course, they're talking about the fact that the leader of the opposition is somebody who openly defected, against PTI. So how do you look at that situation in terms of the legislation at this time?
I agree that if PTI comes and sits in the assembly, it's going to strengthen the assembly, and they should be a part of it, and we welcome them. That's their duty. They have been voted for this specific purpose. If they were in majority, they would have ruled. Now that they're in minority, they should play an active role in opposition, and it's a major role. And I assure you that if they're in parliament, we can reopen everything. We can reopen the NAB amendments, everything. But we would want them, and this is exactly what was missing in the last 4 years. It was this working relationship, and it has to. And as Murtaza Saab, he mentioned rightly that 10 years from 2008 to 2018, we saw that the opposition and the government can work together, be it the water policy, be it the electoral reforms, the 18th Amendment, and that is the spirit of parliamentary democracy. And and this is exactly what PTI did before, from 2013 to 2018. They went for a 126-day dharna, and they were cursing the parliament, and then they came back into the same parliament, and then they ruled the country from the same parliament. This cannot continue. This discourse, this anarchy within the parliamentary system, where we say that streets are the area where we're going to ask for our demands. Protest is going to be how we will be moving forward in the future, or we will be maneuvering political decisions in this country. It cannot work like that. We have to mature. We have to mature. We have to sit in the parliament and sort out our matters. Opposition should be given the utmost respect. They should be given more time to speak in the assemblies. They should be, so this has to happen, and this is the only way. And if this does not happen, if this is not the course that we take today, the system is not going to work. The country is not going to improve. I'm dead sure of it. So there is only one way.
Right. Niaz Saab, your comments before we close. I think some of the things that Rana Saab said are very pertinent. He also said that, there is the opposition should be given respect. The government seems committed to trying to get to a working relationship, but there doesn't seem to be the kind of response that they would like. And, we've seen PTI as a political party, unfortunately not have that kind of response. Of course, your comments on this overall in terms of, you think that this will continue, or do you think that after an acceptance of the fact that the elections are not likely to happen and that the government will complete its term, there's a chance that perhaps that can happen, and that is why the resignations are still pending?
Yeah, I think it happened after the 2014 Dharna. They did come back grudgingly after 4 to 5 months. So that might happen. But then, the immediate challenge for the government is economics. And, we talked about having a charter of economy. But remember, you don't really need a constitutional amendment to, bring about economic reforms. And that's the challenge before the government. It's increased all these prices, and to some extent, the fuel prices, they were inevitable. But then, the government also has to come up with new ideas now. If it's another budget, the budget will be coming next week. And if it's the same kind of old budget where, you maintain all the subsidies for the rich, you don't bring any economic reforms, then, we are not going to be able to break this cycle. And in that case, the government will only have itself to blame, because, PTI cannot stand in the way of economic reforms if the government wants to introduce them. So I think it's critical that we see a very different kind of a budget than what we've been having for years and years and years under each government, where there's no economic reforms.
But Vyasa, we have to acknowledge that at this time the government has very little space with which to act. Whether we talk about the budget, whether we talk about the economy of it, whether we talk about increasing prices are concerned, their hands seem to be tied. Certainly they have to function within the IMF conditionalities, the overall economic situation, all of those things, right?
Well, the economic conditionalities require that you increase your tax base. So what's stopping them from taxing the rich? Go ahead and do that. And, IMF conditionalities ask for certain kind of reforms on the state enterprises, on, your circular debt, on increasing your exports. So go ahead and do that. Come up with some fresh ideas.
Right.
And
unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us, Hafiz Hassan Khokar. Thank you for joining us. Rana Ihsan Afzal Khan, thank you for being with us today. Niaz Murtaza, thank you for joining us today. As far as the overall situation is concerned, certainly we've seen, as far as electoral reforms are concerned, we've also had, NAB law, all these reforms overall. There's a lot of criticism that's coming from the PTI, but at the same time, there is this categorical refusal to be a part of any kind of real amendment process. And there seems to be an overall agreement that the loss at this time certainly theirs in terms of allowing the government to legislate how and where and how they choose to on these crucial issues. Of course, as far as the overall situation is concerned, economy, all of those things, one hopes that there will be a change of heart as far as the opposition is concerned, and there can be some kind of dialogue, some kind of working relationship, which also was missing in the last 4 years, we saw. All of those hopes are certainly attributed not only with the government but also the opposition. Let's hope that those in the business of running the country, even the opposition, can find that kind of common ground. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.